Hi Year 7, Mr. Tapper here for your next lesson of Year 7 Humanities. This lesson we are looking at the ancient Australian language. So we're looking at the different language dialects or types of language of Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders. Our success criteria is to outline the evolution of language in ancient Australia. So how has it changed, why has it changed, and the importance of language to our culture and our heritage. So in ancient Australia, they had over 250 language dialects. Australia is a very multicultural country. We've got a lot of range of religions and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds. We looked at that in civics and citizenship. Our school is a really good example of multicultural Australia. In our school, you'll find students who speak multiple languages. They're born in different places across the country or across the world. However, ancient Australia, over 250 different types of language. Why is that? Well, the main reason why there's so many different types of languages in ancient Australia is that the Indigenous Australians were nomadic. They were a nomadic civilization. If you want to know what that word there means, nomad, think no home. Nomad, no home. Because basically, instead of living in one city or one region permanently, forever and ever and ever, their people would settle in one area and then they would move to another a week later or a month later or 3 months later. And then they would move to another and another and another. You would never have one home in your life. The Indigenous Australians would travel across the country to chase after better weather or better food or better environment. This nomad lifestyle saw the Indigenous Australians travel across the land and interact with other tribal groups. As their people moved and settled into new regions, their language evolved and new languages were created. So basically they would start off in this part of the country with one language, and then they would move to another part of the country. They would meet other indigenous tribes and they would say, oh, I like that word, that's our word now. Or, oh, that word's better than this word, I'm going to replace that. Or I didn't even know that word, that's going to be added to our little dictionary. So their language would slowly change as they met new people and new words and new languages. And over time their language evolved and new languages were created. So that's why there's so many different types of language. It's because lots of people were traveling around, interacting with each other, and sharing language, changing the language. Why is it important to recognize the unique language of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders? What is the power of language? It is our language that allows us to connect to others through communication. Without language, we would not be able to participate in day-to-day life. Think about what you did yesterday or any day. How much of it would be possible without language? If I said you cannot write, you cannot read, you cannot speak, go out there and live, you wouldn't have a fun time. You wouldn't be able to do what you want to. Language helps us to define our identity, our culture. Our language is shaped by our environment, and speaking a language is evidence of your home. If I grow up in somewhere with a lot of snow, like Iceland, my language is probably going to have 100 words for the phrase snow or snow day or something like that. However, if I grew up in the middle of a desert, I probably don't even know what snow is. I've never heard that word. I'm going to hear someone say it and I'll be like, what type of food is that? Because food is always on my mind. So speaking a language is quite literally evidence of your home, of your environment where you grew up. It's very unique to where you live, or where your ancestors lived. Language also connects us to our ancestors, to our heritage, who share this language. I had a lot of mates in high school who had grandparents who were Greek or Chinese, and they would go to language school on the weekend so that they could learn to speak the language that their grandfather spoke, so that they could speak to and interact with and share moments with their parents or with their grandparents. So language is important to our identity and our culture and to recognizing the past. Through spoken and written language, civilizations can record the history of their people. Without language, we wouldn't have history. We wouldn't have a record of what has happened in the past, why are we here, how did we get here. Language can also be used to share information and develop knowledge and skills. It's very difficult to learn anything or to teach someone something if you can't speak, if you don't have the same language. That's why it's important to recognize the different languages in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Oh, before I wander off, please watch this video here, which I've very cleverly embedded into the PowerPoint. It's only 2 minutes, but it's a really, really good video.
The ability to communicate clearly is a key function for all people. Speak still spoken, and people maintain this law gave them protection.
Ancient Australia, language and tradition. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, their language provided connection to culture, stories, those Dreamtime stories, those creation myths, ceremonies, spiritual beliefs, and traditions. Although the languages and spiritual beliefs of the different tribal groups across the land were unique, so although there were differences, there were common features, there were common cultural practices across all the different tribes. This is evidence of their importance to all Indigenous people, and you can see it in artwork, language, traditional ceremonies. So if I was a historian or an archaeologist, and I'm finding all these different types of language, if I'm finding all these different types of artwork from across the different tribes, but I find one ceremony or one piece of art that is common to all of them, you know immediately, oh, that's super important, because although they disagreed about this, everyone knew that this was really important. One of those important things that was common across all Indigenous tribes, and you guys have probably actually heard of this before, is Welcome to Country. Welcome to Country is an ancient ceremony that recognized the boundaries of tribal land. While this ceremony, while this ceremony may have occurred in different languages, it was common throughout all the Indigenous tribes. So you guys have probably heard of Welcome to Country at assemblies, at sporting matches, concerts. If you go to a museum, they sometimes have it written down. It's an important ceremony, and it's common to all Indigenous tribes. They might have different names for it, but it's always there if you go search through their history. And there's a quick 2-minute video there that I encourage you to watch about what is Welcome to Country and why it's important. 2 minutes long there. It talks to a Indigenous Australian, an athlete, a very famous athlete, who tells you a bit about Welcome to Country. So you actually know what it is next time it happens in a school assembly, whenever we have an assembly next. I should also point out this little map, which I thought was cool. In a previous slide, I showed you a map of the different tribes across the Indigenous Australian land. We've looked at it before when we were doing primary source analysis. There it is. This one does the same thing, but instead of actually just drawing the map, they use the names of the different tribes, which I thought was cool. So it's like Kokafa, Madu. Those are the easier to pronounce ones, so I'm going to move on. Right. So now that we know a little bit about Indigenous language and culture and Welcome to Country, we're going to be using that to look at chapter 3.5 in our textbook, which is page 76 to 78. And I'd like you to complete questions 2 to 5, which is on page 79. And I'll show you where that is in a moment, but you can see I've got a screenshot of the questions in the slides. So question 2, what term is used to describe ceremonial leaders in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities? So the leader or the boss of a community, sometimes they'll have different titles. So the leader of our school is the principal. If you go to get a job at Macca's, the leader of Macca's is the manager, the owner. What is the title or the term to describe the leaders of ceremony in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community? So they're not a king or a queen. There's no Aboriginal king. But who are the leaders in these communities of Indigenous Australians? Question 3 is kind of connected. Those leaders that we talked about, what do I have to do to be considered a leader? So what characteristics do I have to qualify as a ceremonial leader in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities? Do I have to be this tall? Do I have to be brave? Do I have to be able to speak 10 different languages? Something like that. So what are the characteristics? What makes someone a leader of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities? Question 4. Name the 2 main languages spoken by the Torres Strait Islander people today. So the 2 main ones spoken by not the Aboriginals living on mainland Australia, but the Torres Strait Islanders who are living on those little islands kind of above Queensland and Northern Territory. So there's 2 main languages. Need to find the names of those in chapter 3.5. Question 5, final question. What is Welcome to Country? What is a Welcome to Country ceremony? And when would it be conducted? When would you hear a Welcome to Country ceremony? Or when would it occur in ancient Australian history? And I recommend, again, watching this video. As you can see, it's related to your question. So that's all you're doing today, guys. Chapter 3 is in Compass Resources. It's also there in Google Classroom. There are the questions in 3.5. Just scrolling up through the chapter now. Some information about Welcome to Country, another map with other maps, and some information about language. So if you have any questions about that, guys, please let me know. Otherwise, best of luck. Hope you're well, and cheers.